Yeah, and this is the inconsistency we were discussing before, and why we cannot continue reporting emissions and therefore taking decisions, operational decision and procurement decisions on the basis of the emissions calculated with this methodology. Because exactly as you're saying, in theory, if I'm procuring exactly the same items over a period of time, and the price, and I'm reporting my emissions spend basis over the next period of time, I'm consuming exactly the same items which have been produced exactly in the same way, consuming exactly the same energy, but I'm reporting a higher emission just because of that, which is just because the price has gone up and the cost has gone up, and therefore the emission has gone up. This is the first inconsistency of the spend basis methodology. The second one, which is even more absurd, as I mentioned before, if I'm purchasing 100 screwdrivers which are produced using a certain type of energy, which is generating a certain emissions, and then I'm taking a conscious decision of replacing my vendor with another vendor, which is producing in a more responsible way, which is using cleaner energy, which is therefore producing less emissions in the process of manufacturing those items. But because of that, that item is costing 10% more. If I'm using the spend basis methodology, my emissions are 10% higher, despite the fact in reality I've maybe reduced my emission by half by purchasing those screwdrivers from that manufacturer. From a reporting point of view, I will be forced to report an increase of emission of 10% because I'm spending 10% more. So no uh, sustainable decision can be taken for the reporting side as well, unless the reporting methodology change. So I need to shift from spend basis to activity basis first in order to be able to see my actions, my responsible and sustainable actions, to turn into lower emission also on the reporting side. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for procurement managers to convince their stakeholders to turn into more responsible decisions if there is no reflection of this into the reporting.
Certainly are some conversations to be had between the ESG departments and the procurement departments, which luckily you already have, Paolo. So this is a little bit of a shout out for those. Another question that is again for ship owners. How does Scope 3 relate to operational decision making, Paolo?
Well, we've been touched a little bit on this while we were covering the previous question. I mean, we've been discussing on how the evaluation uh, process is going to change with the addition of the fourth parameter. We said quality, price, availability were the parameter used until today, and then we had the sustainability as the fourth parameter, the emissions. This is turning into something which is measurable, and therefore, like the dollars, like the days of delivery, like the quality measured in life cycle, and the and the emissions are going to be actual black and white numbers on which procurement will have to take a decision. Um, then, as Rasmus mentioned, and this is something which will come in the phase two, the ability of taking decision on the basis of the life cycle of the items and the equipment will be impacting on how decisions are made. I mean, we were already touching on it before the addition of the emissions as a parameter when you're saying, is it better to buy something which cost double but last double? In terms of 10 years investment, if I have to take a compressor which costs $5,000 and replace it every 5 years, compared to a compressor which I can maintain for 10 years with proper performances and similar cost, it's what is better, right? What is better to if I have to replace that twice over the life cycle, then it's probably better to go for the more expensive item, which has a longer life, because in the end, the total cost of ownership over time will be lower by taking a decision compared to the other. So the emission will add weight to that analysis, because if that compressor not only is costing little less compared to the two replacement, but is also emitting much less, then the decision will be much easier to be taken in going for the more responsible and sustainable decision on the basis of the life cycle, not just on price, but also on the emission calculation. So this is all impacting a lot on the operational decision making of ship owners and ship managers in the future.
Thing to add to Paolo's here?
I think it's spot on. Yeah, no.
I got one final question for this part. What mindset shift does this industry need to make around Scope 3? I think you touched on already, Rasmus.
Yeah. We completely need to realize that fuel alone will not create any zero emission or net zero industries. So looking only at the hydrocarbons, meaning the fuel combustion alone, will not bring us all the way to the desired state where the climate will be mitigated with the climate change. We'll need to widen our scope. And also from a ship owner perspective, acknowledging that emissions are also generated from the suppliers somewhere else and not just when you sail from A to B. But I also need to acknowledge that it's a good place to start with the fuel, because the fuel have a high cost, but it also has a high portion of the emissions on a typical vessel today. And we see from when we do life cycle assessments, we see from 80 to 90% from the big ocean going vessels that is not untypical. That will be Scope 1. So it is a really good place to start. But we also need to be aware of that if we don't focus on the supply chain decarbonization, we will have a problem down the end, because this is a systemic change we need to. We have perhaps 2,000 suppliers. If we wait until it becomes law, it will be very expensive to buy the low carbon products, because supply and demand will press the prices up. So what we can do from a ship owner perspective is to start now when it's free and train the suppliers, start asking for the data, helping them. And this is also what we do at IMEF, is making it free to actually start making the calculations, or at least we have the framework now where you can start working from that. And that is what I call organic decarbonization. Once you start bringing in your supply chain early on, because you will see suppliers that are picking what we can call the low-hanging fruit. They will suddenly, once they start making the calculations, they will start getting to know their emissions of their own products, something that they probably haven't done yet until now. And then they will start seeing that, putting solar panels on the roof might lower our products by 20%, and it's a return on investment in 5 years. So it's a no-brainer for them. But if they haven't put numbers on it, they wouldn't know. So suddenly we are seeing these low-hanging fruit starting to be picked, and that is resulting in lower emissions from the ship owner. But if you're waiting until it becomes law in 5 years from now, that entire change, you wouldn't have documentation on that for the first part, and you might have suppliers that are unaware of their obligations down the line, and suddenly they have to make a lot of expensive investments, capital investments, that might only increase the cost of your products. So it's all about start early, get your suppliers well trained, informed, but also from your own perspective as a ship owner, start putting numbers, start calculating the emissions, start identifying your major emission areas, your hotspots in your supply chain, so you know where to put your focus on in the beginning. Because now you have time and it's free pretty much, right? You don't have a legislation saying in 1 year from now. So you can also afford to do some of this yourself and not hire expensive consultants.
Yeah, Rasmus fully subscribe to that. And I think, and in the end, I mean, it's a mindset shift which will come naturally the moment we start measuring. Because when we start measuring and we have the data in front of us, this is where the mindset shift has already happened. Because in the end, you could not ignore the data. You could not ignore taking those data into account in the decision making. And it for procurement people, this is also going to be a paradigm shift. Because today we identify hotspots in terms of operational risks and cost. What is an hotspot in procurement is the item where you spend the most dollar. Quite easy. That's the main category you need to look after. But then there could be possibly some items when we start using the emissions calculation where maybe the cost is very low, but the emissions is very high. And this will become an hotspot. So all of a sudden, your priority list, which is by reverse dollar amount of each category, will start having at position 2 or position 4 some items which were down the list of priority before because of their low operational risk and low cost, but that will become all of a sudden important because of the emissions. And also the suppliers will see all of a sudden why there is so much attention on toilet paper. I mean, this is the shift, which is going to be also quite exciting for procurement people, having different parameters to base their decision on. It will be creating opportunities for suppliers which are able to identify those hotspots and work in collaboration with the customers, understanding what the customer wants, why things are changing, what is changing. So it's really, I think, what we're trying to do with the IMF is how do we bring on the desk of the supplier purchasing manager and on the ship owner and ship manager purchasing managers those data on which they will be able to take a different decision and approach differently the work they're doing for a better environment in order to reduce the emissions. And in the end, every company is an ecosystem. It's not just our operation. It's not just the scope 1. You can work on the scope 1, but when you brought the scope 1 down to net zero, you cannot turn on the right side and see, oh, what about this? Because then all of a sudden, all your scope 3 will be the 100% of your emissions. And if you want to decarbonize, we need also to neutralize that part. And one option is to reduce it. The other option is to offset it. But we need to reduce it, and IMF will help first to see data and then to suggest what direction need to be taken in order to take better decisions.
Thank you, Paolo. Rasmus, this kind of ends our section on the introduction to scope 1, 2, and 3 with our focus on scope 3, where the IMEF initiative falls under. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.